So if you've ever stumbled across a strange book with indecipherable symbols, you might have thought to yourself, wow, this is interesting. How cryptic, but at least I can see that there are shapes on the pages and I can try to figure out what they mean. But now imagine for a second that you found a real book, and the pages were completely blank. Not just blank, but literally empty. As in, nothing was printed, written, drawn, or even glued onto the pages. And if you took a closer look, you would notice that each page has exactly 47 lines running horizontally across it, with each line having 36 tiny indentations or markings along them. And the same goes for the opposite side of the page. It looks like something important was supposed to be written down, but whatever that is, we don't know because all of those spaces are completely empty. And it's not just one page. It's every single page in the entire book. So here's the question. What does this book mean? Or maybe a better question would be, what did it mean to its original owner? Because this book actually existed and was most likely used for writing down very important information. It was created around 2,000 years ago, and yet it remains one of history's biggest mysteries. First things first, let's talk about how archaeologists discovered this weird book. They found it in a cave in Israel called the Cave of Horror. That's because when they opened it up, they saw these strange markings inside, which looked like teeth marks to them, so they gave it that name. But it turns out these holes weren't made by teeth, as some people suggested, but rather by a special tool specifically designed to punch holes in papyrus. In fact, archaeologists later realized this wasn't just a random book. Instead, it was what's called a pauper's os, a kind of burial box used for holding human remains, specifically the bones that remained after someone had been cremated. In ancient times, people sometimes preferred cremation over burial, because it felt less painful than burying their loved ones alive. Plus, it saved a lot of space, which was useful during plagues and other disasters when people were dying left and right. The ancient Egyptians were the first to popularize cremation around 2,500 years ago, but then the Greeks and Romans picked it up as well. After that, cremation started to fade away, until it became trendy again in more recent centuries. This particular book-shaped box was used sometime before 130 AD. Archaeologists believe that's when the Bar Kokhba revolt happened. That's when Jewish rebels fought against the Roman Empire, but ultimately lost. Afterwards, the Romans prohibited burial rituals and cremation became the only way to go. This led to an increase in the number of these book-shaped boxers, though they didn't last long. The Romans lost interest in the area soon after, and things eventually settled back down. But anyways, moving back to the book, it's currently being held by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. You might think that figuring out what this book means would be easy, since it looks like it was punched out using a machine. Surely, somebody knows about it, right? Wrong. The truth is, nobody knows what it means or why it was made, but experts have a few theories. The most obvious theory is that it was meant to be a generic diary or journal of some sort. If you wanted to keep track of your days, hours, and minutes, you could use this book and put a tally mark in the appropriate spot. But the problem with that theory is that there are no markings on the actual dots. In other words, you couldn't tell the difference between 1, 2, 3, or maybe 10 or 20 indentations. It would have been too easy to lose track. And since there's no variation, it makes us wonder why bother making such a device in the first place. A simple calendar would have been much easier to make and would have served the same exact purpose. Another possibility is that this book was used to keep track of the lunar cycle. Maybe the phases of the moon? This could explain why the book has 47 lines, because that's roughly how many phases the moon goes through within a year. There are 360 degrees in a circle, and if you divide that by 36, you get 10 degrees per notch. If you laid the book flat and traced the lines, you would see that it looks exactly like a wheel, so the notches could represent the degrees in each phase, giving you a total of 10 phases. But unfortunately, the evidence for this theory isn't strong either. For example, if you take a closer look at the lines, you'll notice that they aren't straight. They actually curve, which doesn't really make sense if we're talking about the lunar cycle. Also, each line has 47 holes, which doesn't divide evenly into 360. Another idea is that the book was used for divination, meaning it helped people predict the future. According to Jewish tradition, each line represents one of the 47 books of the Bible, and the dots on each line could be used to calculate the odds of a certain event happening, kind of like rolling dice. For example, let us say there are 7 lines on the left side of the page and 3 dots punched out on each one. If you add those up, you get 21. Let's say the question you were asking had a 21% chance of happening, meaning the answer would be yes. Otherwise, the answer would be no. Now, while this is a clever idea, there's no proof that ancient Jews used any kind of divination system involving numbers and dots. One of the more straightforward theories is that the dots were used as a counting system. Since they're evenly spaced, you could count along them, say from 1 to 36. Then you would move to the next line and do the same thing, continuing until you finish the whole page. This could have been used to keep track of anything: livestock, money, people, etc. Or maybe it was used as a kind of secret code, where each dot had a letter assigned to it. When someone came across this book, they would open it up, close their eyes, stick their finger out, then land it on a bunch of dots. Then they would read whatever letters matched up with them. For example, if they landed on the 3rd indentation on the first line and the 20th indentation on the second line, they would read whatever letters corresponded to those numbers. And speaking of letters, another theory is that the dots were meant to help write down the Hebrew alphabet. We know that the ancient Hebrews wrote their alphabet vertically instead of horizontally. And if you turn this book sideways, you'll see that the lines form columns. Maybe the idea was that each column represented a different letter. If you wanted to write the word dog, you would start at the top and move your finger down each line, punching out a hole whenever you got to the right letter. This would allow you to write multiple letters at once, although we have no idea why the columns had 47 lines or why they were curved. The final theory is that this book was used for astronomy. Specifically, it was used to track constellations. Remember, ancient people didn't have a telescope, so they relied heavily on predicting what would happen based on the alignment of stars. The book would have been opened up and tilted slightly upwards. Then someone would point at the stars and draw a line connecting them. When the line hit a dot, they would punch it out. Over time, this would create a unique pattern of dots that indicated the specific constellation they were looking at. But there are two problems with this idea. First, we don't know why the lines are curved. Stars don't look curved. Second, there's no variation in the patterns. Even if you took two random books and tried to punch out the same constellations on each one, you would get the same result. So it's unlikely that people would have kept track of constellations this way. Regardless, there are still a lot of questions surrounding this mysterious book. Who was it made for? Why was it made? And what exactly was it for? The answers to these questions could change our understanding of ancient life, but unfortunately, they might be lost forever. Thanks for watching.